What if I told you that you could be speaking Mandarin right now instead of English? What if the Industrial Revolution fired up in Beijing, not Birmingham? Sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, right? But this wasn't just some wild fantasy, it was almost our reality. Let's travel back 600 years. China was the undisputed global superpower, a giant with the might to shape the entire world. But then, a single, fateful decision was made, causing them to turn their back on global domination. So, the big question is, what if that decision was never made? Picture this. It's the early 1400s. The Ming Dynasty is at the zenith of its power, a sprawling empire built on the ingenuity and labor of millions. And leading its grand ambition is one of the most remarkable, Admiral Zheng He. His story is incredible. A former slave, he rose through the ranks on pure talent and unwavering determination to command the largest and most advanced fleet the world had ever seen. I'm not exaggerating. We're talking about an armada of over 300 ships. The largest ones, the treasure ships, were over 400 feet long floating fortresses that would have absolutely dwarfed anything Europe could put on the water at the time. Their mission wasn't conquest in the typical sense. It was to project China's unparalleled greatness across the known world. For nearly 3 decades, Zheng He's magnificent fleets sailed the Indian Ocean. They were marvels of navigation and engineering, battling pirates, surviving treacherous storms, and charting the unknown. They reached the shores of India, sailed to the rich ports of Arabia, and even made it all the way to the coast of Africa. But here's the key difference from the European explorers who would follow. They didn't conquer with swords and cannons. They impressed and influenced with sheer scale, bringing gifts of silk, porcelain, and advanced technology. They weren't just ahead of the curve. China was playing a completely different game, a league of its own. But while Zheng He was making waves across the globe, a storm was brewing back home in the Forbidden City. A powerful and conservative faction was gaining influence, the scholar officials. They viewed these epic voyages as a colossal waste of money, a reckless drain on the imperial treasury. Their philosophy was one of isolationism. They argued that the Middle Kingdom was self-sufficient, possessing everything it needed within its own vast borders. Why look outward when perfection was already at home? When a new, more impressionable emperor ascended to the throne, these officials saw their chance. They whispered their isolationist doctrines in his ear day after day, and eventually they won. The imperial decree was issued. The order was given. The greatest fleet in human history was to be dismantled. The ships were left to rot in their harbors. To erase this chapter from history, the detailed logs and charts of Zheng He's voyages were systematically burned. The memory of these grand expeditions was deliberately suppressed. The vast ocean, which had once been a highway for Chinese ambition and exploration, was turned into a formidable barrier. On das China, the world's doors, a fragmented and struggling Europe, sniffing a power vacuum, began painstakingly building its own tiny ships, dreaming of the riches that lay beyond the horizon. Now, let's fire up our historical imagination. What if that recall order was ignored? What if Zheng He, a man of incredible vision, decided the emperor's new advisors were wrong? What if, instead of returning home, he turned his fleet not west, but east, and dared to cross the vast, uncharted Pacific. Let's explore this alternate timeline. In the short term, by the year 1450, Chinese trading posts would likely be dotting the California coast. They wouldn't just be trading. They'd be introducing transformative technology. Imagine the wheel, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated agricultural techniques spreading across the Americas centuries ahead of schedule. Crucially, they would also introduce immunities to Old World diseases, inoculating the native populations against the devastating plagues that would later wipe out up to 90% of them in our timeline. Let's fast forward a bit into the medium term. A new Silk Road, a maritime one, now spans the Pacific. The immense silver wealth of Peru and Bolivia flows directly to Beijing, not to Madrid, fueling an even greater golden age for the Ming Dynasty. Without the seemingly endless flow of New World gold and silver, Spain remains a regional power, never achieving the global dominance it had in our history. When an ambitious Genoese sailor named Columbus finally gets his funding and arrives decades later, he doesn't find a new world ripe for conquest. Instead, he discovers well-established and prosperous coastal provinces, whose inhabitants speak a dialect of Mandarin and declare their allegiance to the faraway Ming Emperor. The history of the world is now on a completely different track. Now, let's consider the long-term consequences. The center of global power never shifts from east to west. There is no age of discovery led by Europe, and therefore no Spanish, Portuguese, or British empires as we know them. The scientific revolution, instead of being a primarily European phenomenon, becomes a collaborative global effort, with innovations flowing back and forth between the academies of Beijing, Samarkand, and Florence. And you? You might be watching this very video on a platform called ZhongWenTube, or reading subtitles in a world where English is a minor language spoken on a small island off the coast of Europe. It's a truly staggering thought, isn't it? The entire shape of our modern world, the languages we speak, the borders on our maps, the very balance of global power could all hinge on a single political decision, a battle of wills in a palace courtyard 600 years ago. It serves as a powerful lesson in how fragile global dominance can be and how quickly the tide of history can turn. It shows us that history doesn't just belong to the brave explorers and brilliant inventors. It belongs to those who possess the grit and foresight to keep pushing forward, especially when others are telling them to turn back. So, what do you think? Would a world shaped by Chinese exploration of the Americas have been a more peaceful one? Or would we have just seen a different kind of global empire with its own set of conflicts and conquests? I'm curious to hear your wildest theories, so let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy diving into these fascinating moments where history almost took a completely different path, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us at Voice of Grit. Our next journey into the what-ifs of the past is already waiting for you. Thanks for watching.